Investigators say the Somali-born student who carried out the car and knife attack at Ohio State University Monday may have been inspired by ISIS and a former al-Qaeda leader. 18-year-old Abdul Razak Ali Artan was killed by a police officer. Law enforcement officials say it's too soon to call the incident terrorism. They say they are not aware of any direct contact between the attacker and ISIS. House Homeland Security Committee Chairman McCaul joins us tonight to discuss the Donald Trump national security setup, but first to get reaction to the Ohio State situation and investigation. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Brett.
What do we know about this guy and his potential ties?
We know he's born in Somalia, immigrated to Pakistan from Pakistan in 2014, came into the United States. We also know that there's secondary screening by Customs and Border Patrol coming out of Pakistan into the United States. I've requested a copy of that report to see what, if anything, we may have known about this individual before he came into the United States. But here again, we have another case of an individual coming from a high-threat, hot terror spot area into the United States, radicalizing and then attempting to kill people.
I mean, the FBI is saying now he's likely self-radicalized. However, officials can't get to calling it terrorism. We've seen this before. Why?
We've seen this movie time and time again. They are very reluctant to call it what it is. It's radical Islamist terror. We know that he was inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki, the same cleric that inspired, Nidal Hassan, the Fort Hood bomber, Rohami, the New York bomber, Chattanooga, San Bernardino, all linked to Anwar al-Awlaki. In addition, we know that the Sheikh Adnani, the ISIS spokesman, who was killed by a drone strike, set forth in 2014 what the new terror agenda is going to be, and that is to attack the non-believer, the kuffar, he calls it, in their backyard. So this is a new terror threat that's evolving, and that is to activate individuals in the United States by means of the internet to kill Americans. And what Adnani talks about is using vehicles and knives, the same method that this terrorist used in Ohio.
There is a frustration here, and clearly the election, Donald Trump tapped into that, about the concern about radical Islam in the election. He did tweet today that this person should not have been allowed into the country, should not have been here as a refugee. How would you prevent this guy from being here?
Well, I think one thing is very clear, and I've met with the president-elect, and we talked about ramping up our vetting procedures in terror spot areas like Pakistan to raise the threshold. I have a bill in the Congress to provide that an ICE investigation take place over there before they come into the country, and that we also use things like social media. We saw the San Bernardino plot unfold with a black widow who had things on social media, yet we didn't know about that. No employer would hire somebody without looking at their Facebook and social media, and the federal government is just now doing this and not doing it very well.
But you agree that there's an evolution here, a self-radicalization, that if the guy comes in as a kid, you're not going to be able to process that or stop that before it happens, right?
And I think that is the core of the problem and the issue. If somebody comes in and they pass the screening test, which I think needs to be ramped up, once they're here, can they self-radicalize, or do they have more of a propensity to do so? We saw that in case after case. The Syrian population, I introduced the bill, the SAFE Act, to stop the flow of Syrian refugees into the United States because of what I saw to be a high-risk factor of not only terrorists coming in, which is what the DNI warned and Secretary of Homeland warned about, and FBI, but the idea that once they're here, they have the potential to self-radicalize and kill Americans.
I want to turn and ask you about your meeting with the President-elect. You're said to be considered for Homeland Security Secretary, a job I assume you want. How did that meeting go, by your thoughts?
I thought it went very well. We had a very productive and substantive conversation on his priorities, many of them related to Homeland Security. We talked about this case specific, the Ohio State case, and we talked about, in terms of immigration, how can we ramp up the vetting procedures overseas so we don't have this happen in the United States, and we don't have the Orlandos and the New York Rohami bombing and the San Bernardino case. I think we need to look at immigration differently. Coming from these high-threat areas, we need a higher threshold of investigation and review and vetting before we let these individuals into the United States.
You know, as names are being tossed around, there's a lot of people that put stuff out, either for or against someone. Today in the Washington Times, the president of the Americans for Legal Immigration PAC wrote, "We certainly hope that Donald Trump would not reward a deceptive pro-amnesty lawmaker like Michael McCaul with a cabinet position. That would be very disappointing to all of us that believed his campaign promises to secure our borders and deport millions of illegal immigrants under current U.S. law." Your response to that?
Unfortunately, when you have people jockeying for a position, they will go to the press and say negative and false things. This is absolutely false. I've never supported that idea. In fact, I've been consistently the biggest advocate on the Hill to secure the border. And I talked to Mr. Trump about how we can secure the border once and for all and building the wall. Countless times I've stood up to defend the United States against terror coming in and terrorist pathways. So I find it incredulous, inflammatory, and quite frankly, it's slanderous.
I had House Speaker Paul Ryan in that very chair a few weeks ago asking him about immigration. He did sound a little bit different, obviously, than Donald Trump on the trail. Do you think that there will be synergy in how to deal with immigration with the House and Senate Republicans and the Trump administration?
I think there's going to be great synergy, and the meeting I had with the president-elect was very positive in terms of advancing his agenda. I think what we're going to be looking at is how do we build the wall, secure the border? How do we deport criminal aliens out of the United States? How do we close terror pathways into the United States to stop like the Ohio State terrorists from coming in? How do we stop the Rohamis in New York from the bombing plots? How do we ramp up vetting in overseas countries? Rudy Giuliani and I and Judge Mukasey, the World Trade Center federal judge and Attorney General of the United States, and I worked together on a memo that we provided to the president-elect 6 months ago, talking about how we can ramp up this vetting process overseas in terror hotspots to keep bad guys and terrorists from coming into the United States.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your time. We'll be following the transition.